Welcome back to the Traders Network Show and our coverage of the 2018 Humanity 2.0. I'm Matt Bird, broadcasting worldwide from the Vatican for equities.com and our network syndicated partners. My next guest needs very little introduction on the global stage. He is the Director of Finance and Enterprise Affairs for the OECD. We've got Greg MedCraft. Greg, welcome to the show.
Matt, it's good to see you.
Greg, I've been trying to hunt you down now for 2 years, 2 Davos appearances. I just missed you in Australia. I didn't have it in me to make that trip after coming off of something from Europe. And I was like pleased to see you on the roster. And I was like, I just got to nail Greg down.
I'm pleased to be here, and I'm pleased to be talking to you.
I appreciate that. So, we'll start off. We're here at Humanity 2.0. You've consumed a little bit of the content going on inside. We've got a lot of thought leaders, a lot of influencers. Can you give us a little bit of a takeaway for you thus far on the event?
Look, I think this is a great initiative because if you think about one of the biggest problems today is really an issue of trust in society. And I think the idea behind Humanity 2.0, it's actually helping to rebuild some of that trust. If you think about the initiative in terms of the School of Business Ethics that's been proposed, I think it's great because that is again a key element of how we build trust in business. But even what they're looking at doing in terms of maternal health care is concretely helping rebuild trust in the community and how one part of the community can help the other. Because a part of trust is there are a lot of people. Rising inequality is a massive issue today, and how one side can reach out to the other to help bridge that, I think, is important. Now, these are two things, there's so much to do, but these are really important steps. And I think it's great in terms of it is about Humanity 2.0. We've got to think more about one another.
How can companies help move, like you're talking about like healthcare and birthing and those sorts of things, but what can private companies do? You're on the public side, you deal with a lot of public-private partnerships, a lot of enterprise integration on multiple levels. You've got your finger on the pulse of what's working, what's not working. You know what works, what doesn't work. You can see it a mile away. If you're an organization, and let's just say we got Google here, we've got Burst IQ, we've got a number of different groups. What can these private companies do? Cisco, what can they do to actually move the needle for something like this?
You know what? They can be champions. They can be champions of basically thinking about the social license and what the community is really expecting in business, and they can lead by example within their own companies. Equally, they can actually be out there, having a dialogue with other companies to look for like-minded companies to share their experience. So, this is not, I'm more about evolution than revolution. And part of evolution is actually the first thing is to start at home and do the right thing, right? And then to try and have a dialogue to expand, like we're doing here, like-minded parties. And that's a bit like with what happens with OECD. It's about like-minded governments around the world. What we want is better policies for better lives. And I'll emphasize it's about better lives. And that applies whether you're a company or you're a government. It's actually, at the end of the day, it's actually about better lives. When you think about it, it's actually what Humanity 2.0 is actually trying to do as well.
It's people helping humanity.
Correct.
That's it. Well, listen, I think you've got a panel coming up right next, right?
Very soon.
And I can see people kind of looking over here, making sure you're okay.
But I will say, from our point of view at OECD, our contribution from my directorate on that is around conduct and responsible business conduct, whether it be in supply chains, whether it be dealing with things like anti-corruption, because corruption is a shocking thing around the world. It actually affects humanity, communities. They pay too much or they don't get access. And it's also about making sure that you have, again, good corporate governance. So that's the sort of angle we're looking at today.
Speaking of corruption, and I don't want to go down that path, but as public-private partnerships, and it's an area that I'm pretty familiar with, becoming more commonplace. What are organizations? What do public directors, directors of public entities need to be looking at to be able to not cross that boundary? And it's a very slippery slope because the intent is good, but sometimes there's that gray area. Yeah. How do you maintain that balancing act of there's a way to operate. Let's map to the way private companies. You get what you want so long as we get what we want, and everybody benefits. But where is that delicate balance that?
Well, I think first of all, it is about culture and having the right culture in a company. That first of all, we don't pay bribes.
Yep.
Okay. But then it's a matter of making sure that you have procedures and policies in place to make sure that that vision actually flows through the whole company, and that you have the right culture, but equally you have methods of detecting potential, where briberies occurred in your company. And and what we do at OECD in the corruption area, we have standards that companies can follow in their supply chains in terms of dealing with detecting corruption, and we have our overall corporate governance principles that deal with dealing with corruption. So there are tools available to companies in terms of due diligence and overall corporate governance policies that actually to help you do the right thing.
And we got to go on and we got to swap out. We have some logistical stuff going on, but this is a really neat opportunity for companies out there that have thought about engaging on a public-private partnership level, have resources that want to apply, but they also, the partnership means that there's a two-way collaboration, right? Yep. So should a company, how should the formation of stuff go from your standpoint of what is expected from both sides?
Well,
should
I think
the company lay out what their expectations are?
I think actually two sides. One, clearly companies need to have their own standards in terms of corruption, but equally if they're dealing with government, public sector, public-private,
but P3.
Yes. So we advise governments in terms of corporate governance standards from a public perspective. So for state-owned entities, what are the standards? Independence of boards. So we've established standards that actually, and we advise governments around the world who have SOEs. It's a very big part of our business, and my directorate is advising governments around the world as how do you put in place the right internal controls to make sure that you mitigate against demands for corruption payments. So, for example, making sure you have open public procurement, right? That it's all traceable. But also we're looking at a thing at the moment that's called compliance with our borders, where basically you have state-owned enterprise employees going from there into the private sector to understand how they deal with compliance, anti-corruption. So there's many things you can do, both from private sector and government sector, and at the end of the day, it's all about underpinning trust.
It is about trust.
Because the social license today, communities in most countries around the world do no longer tolerate corruption, and more every day grows because as they appreciate that 10% of the world's GDP goes to paying corruption. That's 10%.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's 10% that actually could be going to building hospitals and schools and lower costs and education.
And I just read an article from the CEO of the Global Compact. She published this article and a invitation to help meet the goals for the UN SDGs, which is only 1% of the global GDP. So if 10% of the corruption were to cease, we could put that money back into the global community, we'd be on track.
That's why we focus heavily on fighting corruption.
Wow. All right, everybody, Greg MedCraft, the head of the OECD, Finance.
And Enterprise Affairs.
And Enterprise Affairs. Listen, thanks for coming on the show. I'm going to have you back on. I hope I can get you as a regular, if anything via satellite. Tracking you down in different countries is sometimes a challenge. But listen, we'll be right back with our next guest. You're not going to want to miss him on the panel. Can you tell us a little about the panel that you're going to be on?
Yeah, well, the panel we're on now is talking about sustainability and why it matters.
And this guy knows what he's talking about. We'll be right back after these messages. Don't go away.